please, yes, yes.
But it's my pleasure to introduce Charlene Senegal, who works as operations manager at the Yale University Art Gallery. Is that right, Anna? Operations manager in the business department. You know, at Yale University Art Gallery, which is hosting the show of the century, though they're not my words, of Rhode Island furniture from 1600 to about 1830. And I can say why it is fabulous. And both of you are showing those you can be justified and proud of doing so. So what was her part? She's going to tell you that part, but I can tell you that she, through her research with Mary Norman Rogers, was instrumental in getting the library to lend many of the things she will tell you about to this show. And if you are a regular in the room, you'll notice that the portrait there is written So, Charlene, please fill in anything that I have omitted.
Absolutely.
And thank you for coming back.
Well, thank you. I first of all want to thank everyone for coming out this evening. I know during the week it's very busy for everyone, so I appreciate you coming out and spending a little bit of time with me. As I say, my research is very fulfilling, but if I can't share it with the public, it's kind of like a loss. So being able to share it with the public through these talks and, of course, now with the exhibition at the Art Gallery is very, very fulfilling. I'm going to, before I start, I'm going to be bringing up some topics about probate records, provenance, and collections. And I'm happy to, at the end, I'm happy to take any questions about my presentation, anything about the exhibition at the gallery. I ask that you take time. There's information that you can take back with you about the gallery, about the exhibition, different things that have been published about the exhibition so far. My business card is on both tables. If you want to talk further, if you want more information about my research or what we have going on at the gallery, I'm more than happy to answer questions, send you press releases, articles I might have in PDF, and so we'll go from there. So I'm going to begin by starting the journey of who was Mary Noyes Rogers. Let me just make sure technically we're up and running. So my journey began in 2003. During a holiday recess, my mother had passed away in 2003 in October, and my siblings and my father kind of put me in charge of disposing of my mother's different items so we could move on. So in doing that, every now and then I would take a break and find another cupboard in my family's house to clean out, just because I just didn't want to concentrate on my mom's stuff. So as I was cleaning out some cupboards, I, got to some boxes and, said to my father, "Do you know what this is?" He goes, "No." He goes, "When we bought our house, I was just out of the Navy. My sister and I were 2 and 3 years old. My mother was expecting her third child. And so my father needed to get a house ready and get a house ready very quickly. So he just kind of shoved things in corners, and so that's where it was. So what I happened to find in this box was I found this obituary, Mrs. Rogers dead at 91. And I read it and I said, "Oh, Leicester Avenue. That's the street that I grew up on." I don't know anything about this woman. There was no date on the newspaper clipping. So in the same box, and the picture here is actually the Noyes Rogers homestead on Leicester Avenue. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So in that same box, there was this other newspaper article called Town Talk of Yesterday. or it was changed yesterday and yesteryear, by a gentleman by the name of C.J. Norris. And he was kind of like the local historian, maybe a little bit of gossip columnist for the Wesley Sun. And in his article, he says, just a couple of days ago, Mary Noyes Rogers passed away. And this article said, March of 1938. So now I was able to go and find out, when did Mary Noyes Rogers, pass away. And in this, I probably wouldn't have gone any further, but in this article that Mr. Norris wrote, he talks about Mary Noyes Rogers being a descendant of the very important Noyes family that emigrated from England during the religious persecution of the late 1700s, how they settled in Staunton, how her descendant was instrumental in, many facets of the Revolutionary War, and different members of the family, how they had owned land in Pawcatuck and in Westerly and surrounding areas. And it also talked about the family heirlooms that were now in Mary Noyes Rogers' hands, and how she opened her home to one and all who wanted to do research, learn about the history. She was like a curator or a conservator of her time, and spoke with different people about the history of her family and the town. Now, in Mr. Norris's article, some of the things that I have bullet pointed, which then set me on my journey, which has now been a 13-year plus journey. He mentions furniture, pewter, and silverware marked and imprinted by colonial craftsmen. The old hall clock is referred to as the Paul Stillman clock of 1807. The landed estate, a one-time small farm in Pawcatuck Village, and that Mary Noyes Rogers came down from early settlers, traced back to Reverend Noyes, the first minister of the Road Church, organized in 1674. What is truly exciting about taking a look at this is that if we had all the shades open and we all went to the window right now, we look at the Washington Trust Bank, we look at the divider between Wesley and Pawcatuck, the river, we look at what used to be Higgins Pharmacy, Best Eaten Donuts, and all the buildings there. That was the epicenter of commerce, residential living in the early 19th century, which is just amazing to think that, to be able to give this talk and look right out there. And I'll point out, just reference a few buildings and different areas that all of you, who, if you're local, you'll know immediately where some of this industry was happening in the 19th, late 18th, early 19th century. So this, reading these two articles, and my background in doing extensive research, the first thing I needed to do was to get to probate records, to find out, because in this article it said that Mary Noyes Rogers had limited relatives, and instead of trying to divide stuff up among people, she was going to go ahead and give all of her items to the Wesley Public Library, the Daughters of American Revolution branch in Groton, Connecticut, the Anna Warner Bailey, and family papers, diaries, ledgers to the Connecticut Historical Society. Some of her more current holdings, she had established a People's Mission in downtown Pawcatuck to care for people who were less fortunate than she was. So all of her modern furnishings, and also the sale of her estate on Leicester Avenue and the land, all of the proceedings after her debts were finalized, all of the money would go to the People's Mission. So she was a philanthropist, she was a historian, she was, I'm going to call her a curator or a connoisseur. And as you see as I move forward, you'll understand why I use those different words to kind of describe her. So this map right here is a map of 1854 of what they call the village of Pawcatuck. You could see the river running through it, and all of these areas that I have a little bit of yellow, these were all residents and businesses of the Noyes family in 1854. Now, here's downtown Pawcatuck. You go just a little bit up the street, up West Broad. Now, if you know up West Broad a little bit, where West Broad Street School is, this was not developed. There was not Leicester Avenue, Moss Street, Cortlandt, William Street. This area right here in 1854, all of this land here that says Miss Noyes, this belonged to a 10-year-old young lady as bequeathed to her from her paternal grandfather and then her father. So at 10 years old, she owned all of this farmland. And this farmland went back to the later part of the 17th century. In 1854, just 4 years earlier, in the census records of that time, Mary Noyes Rogers' father had passed away. She was only 4 years old, just about 4 years old. Her parents had only been married 5 years, and her father suddenly passed away. And in the 1950 census, it shows that they were living in Hopkinton, which is where her mother was from, and that their mother put a value in the census that her mother had holdings herself of $1,200 in real estate, but Mary Noyes Rogers had $4,000 of wealth in land holdings at that age in 1850, which in today's calculation comes to just a little bit shy of $125,000, which is just amazing. So the thing is that all of this was farmland. All of what is, Moss Street and Leicester and now Chase Street, where the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center is, this was all farmland. And I have read accounts of the livestock on the farm, that there was a cut through underneath the railroad bridge where the animals would go through the railroad bridge cut through, go down to the Pawcatuck River and drink water, and this was all farmland, so they would travel back and forth. And so here's the little farm right here, and no other houses, which is just, absolutely amazing. Now, a little bit about when I did pull the will for Mary Noyes Rogers, as I said, she passed away in the early part of 1938. She had drawn up a will in 1928. She was a widow at that time. She did not have children. She also, her family, on both her maternal and paternal side, there were a lot of intermarriages, which meant first cousins were married. Her paternal grandfather, Thomas Noyes Jr., married his first cousin, Polly, or they would call her Mary Noyes Rogers, and they were both in their late 30s, early 40s when they married, so they immediately started a family at that point, and that was in 1799. And their first son was George Washington Noyes, who was Mary Noyes Rogers' father. He married his first cousin, Martha Babcock Noyes from Hopkinton. George Washington Noyes was 43 when he married, and his wife was 39. And within the first year of their marriage, they had one child, Mary Noyes Rogers. So in Mary Noyes Rogers' will here, which is very, very detailed, it's about 8 pages, and this right here was just a real eye-opener as to the detail of information that she put into this will. But it also brought up questions for me is, where did all of these items, the first passage in her will is just lists in quantity and hallmarks and engravings. Every single piece of silver that she bequeathed to the library here, which makes someone like myself, makes my job much easier when it's so detailed, because you can then match items. But there's also some exciting little pieces within her will. But I needed to find out, Mary Noyes Rogers had also written down a lot of her family history extensively and sent that on with the pieces to the library here in what we call, the library then writes up accession records. And that's a word we use in the museum industry, libraries, any place that takes in a collection. An accession record will just note how any pieces were given to them, the year, description. In this day and age, of course, with digital imagery, we could take digital images and match them to the accession records, but those are in value. But the accession records also have notes from Mary Noyes Rogers, which are very helpful because she'll note different things about some family history, which then has to be traced. So I needed to find out where these pieces came from. So that sent me on a journey to pull see if there were prior wills on her paternal or maternal family side. And I was able to go back and pull, both her father and her grandfather died intestate, which meant they didn't have a will. So in those days, probate went in with an administrator and did a minute, like down to the last detail, inventory of all holdings. So we're talking pages upon pages of weights of grain, especially if there was a farm, livestock, anything that was put up for the winter, down to internal holdings in the home, the land, and all of that. By chance, I came across a book written about the Connecticut Daughters of the American Revolution that was published in the early part of the 20th century. And there was an article on Mary Noyes Rogers' mother, Martha Babcock Noyes. And there's a picture of her, and there's a whole article. And I found this quite by chance. At the Stuyton Historical Society had a piece of this book, and after some research, I actually found the entire book to be microfilmed and out in the internet through a library resource, which was just incredible because I've not been able to find the whole book in its actual form. But what this did is, in this article talking about Martha Babcock Noyes connection to Revolutionary War heroes, it included all of these pictures that you'll see here in a sepia tone. And in these pictures, each page has a description. And before I saw these pictures in this book, like 20 years earlier from a private collection, I had a collection of all of these pictures in my possession from a private collection and never knew what they related to. So now I'm like, this is what these pictures are all about. So here we see the interior of a home with furnishings and chairs and all kinds of descriptions within this article about the family, where these pieces all came from, silver tankards, silver buckles. What I have at the top here is a notation about, this is Mary Noyes Rogers' grandfather's inventory, Thomas Noyes Jr., and it talks about different pieces, and here it talks about 2 tall back chairs that were in his inventory. Here is the early 20th century picture with chairs, and here are the actual chairs that are in the Wesley Public Library collection that are on view at the Babcock Smith House. What is very interesting is in these pictures, and I have a couple different versions of this when, I think it was about 2 years ago, when my colleagues and I from the Yale Art Gallery came to examine these chairs in person. My lead curator, Patricia Kane, was looking at the rush seats, which were replaced at some time, but she said along the seat here, there were all little pin marks, which indicated to her that at one time there was upholstery over the rush seats. And in these early pictures that I have, you could see a piece of upholstery, which is just amazing that, she was able to see that. There's also one of the stretchers, these decorative stretchers here. We took these photographs and put them under a microscope because when we examined these chairs, Pat Kane said, one of these stretchers is not original. It's been replaced. She could tell by the wear, because as you can imagine, people put their feet up on the stretchers of a chair, so you're going to see wear marks. And one did not have the same amount of wear marks as the other, even though they both were period chairs. And when we examine them further, the pictures here with the chairs, and you'll see another picture, one has one design on the stretcher, one has a different design, but the chairs that are present both have the same design in the stretchers. So there was the first little mystery of, okay, where are these chairs from? Because the Yale Art Gallery had examined these chairs about 8 years earlier, but didn't know anything about the provenance, where they were from, what they were associated with. But we put them into our database that we were starting with the hopes of a book and an exhibition down the road. And now we were able to kind of tie this together. Now the next thing is another photograph. Is the interior, again the interior of the home, some notes. Here's one of those accession cards, and actually notes by Mary Noyes Rogers herself as it's signed, talking about this wonderful gilt mirror here. And here in Thomas Noyes Jr.'s inventory is a description of the gilt mirror. And here Mary Noyes Rogers, at the time that she wrote this, identified this as an antique that she thinks was purchased in the late 18th century by her grandfather upon his wedding, as probably housekeeping for his wedding, and she notes it there as an antique. So here we have this piece, and then all these other wonderful pieces. This piece right here is also part of the library collection. This mirror is. The other pieces, we don't know where they are, but we're always looking because they could be somewhere. Here's another picture of the chairs, and here you can see a little bit of the stretcher. This particular image was not in the book, but it's in a private collection, and the back of it has all these handwritten notes by Mary Noyes Rogers that talks about the history of these pieces, and it's just absolutely fascinating to read everything about the descriptions. This corner chair, all of these wonderful pieces. Again, the silver pieces and the buckles. Again, another interior shot, and here's a close-up picture of the chair. But here we have one of the highlights is the Stillman clock of 1807 that is in Thomas Noyes Jr.'s will, which was called an 8-day clock, and here it is in this, so we can kind of put together, an 1844 inventory with an early 20th century image that matches then further on Mary Noyes Rogers' last will and testament. So in Mary Noyes Rogers' will, she bequeaths to the Wesley Library the aforementioned tall clock made in 1907 by Paul Stillman. Now, come on. What she failed to say in her will was that not only this beautiful clock, but the original, if you can imagine, the original bill of sale when her grandfather commissioned the clock on December of 1807, Thomas Noyes Jr. to Paul Stillman. Here is the 8-day clock for 38 American dollars. The case for the clock was $30, and the glass for the clock, 75 cents, for a total of $68.75. Payment in full by Paul Stillman. All written out here. This was taped on the inside door of the clock and has remained there since 1807, which is unheard of. This is actually quite thrilling. Now, when we say this is a Stillman clock, we still have not identified the maker of the case. When we can figure out the maker of the case, we kind of hit a bonanza, and we're still working quite hard on that. And that one's a little bit of a mystery. When we say the maker, we're talking about the works of the clock. This is what we call a bonnet-style clock. These little scrolls right here, this is called a broken, what we call a broken pediment top with brass finials. I'll show you some other examples because as I was doing my research to find out if there were any more Stillman clocks, an interview in 1939 with a research librarian here at the library in a trade journal called National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors identifies that at this time the librarian knew of no other clocks made by Paul Stillman that existed. And I'll be happy to tell you that many have been discovered in the past couple years, and some of them right in town here, which is extremely exciting. I will point out that Paul Stillman, family of silversmiths, Barton Stillman was the uncle. He actually designed one of the first combination locks that was in the Washington Trust Bank when it opened in 1800. So a family of ingenious engineers, silversmiths. Now, the next passage in her will was that she gives an oil painting of her grandfather, Thomas Noyes, and if it was desired and accepted, if not, it should be destroyed. And it took me several years to try to find out where this was, because once probate is read, there's no follow-up probate that says this went to this person accepted. And just by chance, I was visiting the Staunton Historical Society, and Mary Thatcher, who is one of their leading experts on the oil paintings of the area, and a great genealogist, we were chatting, and I said, do you have any idea? The library at that time was in the middle of renovation. Everything was put away, and so nothing could be accessed. And a lot of folks here didn't know where some of the collections were, what they had. So I was very, very pleased when I was led into this room and Mary Thatcher said, it's right in the library, and here he is. It wasn't destroyed, it was taken in. It sat on the wall right over here above the fireplace from when it was given in 1938, and I don't think anyone ever really knew what it was. So we are thrilled that he is still with us. And it has never been out of, it has always been in private holdings except when it came to the library here. I did find in some of the research that in 1974, the Folk Art Museum in Washington, D.C. borrowed this piece for an exhibition on early folk art, paintings, samplers, all types of items of this. And there was some information and research written up about it. One of the things that was pointed out is that on Thomas Noyes' frock shirt here, there was a pin, and it's very hard to see because when I first looked at it, I was like, couldn't understand. But if you look close, there's a shape of a heart. He is wearing this pin right here, which he fashioned himself, and it's identified to probably be made in 1799 upon the celebration of his marriage. And as a silversmith, he made this pin with his initials, TN, Thomas Noyes. And in doing further research, this little edgework is consistent with early silversmithing at that time. We think the pin on the back was replaced because there's a different backing on it, and so there's no hallmarks, but it relates directly to this picture. And we're pleased to say that this was in the Wesley Public Library collection that came from Mary Noyes Rogers. It wasn't noted individually because she did write in her will miscellaneous jewelry and bric-a-brac in many different passages. So as we come across different items in their actual form, we're thinking that's the miscellaneous bric-a-brac. But these two pieces are now proudly down in the exhibition at Yale, along with the clock, to kind of tie all of this together. These are also, these are earlier period photographs that correspond to that DAR book. You see all the silver buckles. This is all in Mary Noyes Rogers' hand, and probably her mother's hand also, talking about the significance of the flatware, the silver spoons, the jewelry. And these are the actual buckles that are here at the library as part of the collection. Again, really super exciting. This set of tongs, which was made by Thomas Noyes, hallmarked by him. They have a wonderful, as you can think of the area, you think of Newport furniture with the shell motifs. These have, for the little tong ends, little scallop shells, which when I first had them in my hand, was just kind of moved to see that delicate work and the kind of the relationship to this Wesley Park area with, with the sea and with shellfish and such. So you see that throughout furniture, and I'll be showing you some other pieces. Here also are a bunch of pieces that were bequeathed to the library that are here in the collection. You'll see the TN. These are all hallmarked Thomas Noyes. There's pieces hallmarked by Perry, who was another local silversmith. Also the family that opened the Washington Trust Bank, a silversmith. Here's that beautiful set of tongs with the beautiful silverwork that Thomas Noyes made. And he had a little pseudo hallmark, a little dove taking wing, which I'm checking with, and talking with my curators at the art gallery at Yale, have never ever heard of or seen that pseudo hallmark. So it's another little thing that we've found, and they actually had never heard of Thomas Noyes as a silversmith. So we've now discovered a new silversmith, which is very exciting. I included these set of spoons that Thomas Noyes made because they were quite unusual in that he actually, silver was an important commodity. It was an expensive item. And you see on period shows, Downton Abbey or any of those kind of things, how, the butler of the house had to do inventory after each dinner to make sure all the silver went back in the butler's pantry. And Thomas Noyes actually numbered each piece of silver. So it's, I think this is 2, 3, 4, 5. There's one missing. I think there's 6 in the collection, and there's one number that's not there. But what's nice is they're also dated 1799 when he got married, and then when his sister got married, Polly Noyes Wells, her date of marriage is on there. And then the silver, it's kind of dark here, but then it went on to Mary Noyes Rogers, and when she married her husband, then it's dated on there. So, a gift that just kept being reinscribed as they passed it on through family. This piece right in the middle is a very early piece by Thomas Noyes that he made for his sister Phoebe, and it has simulated amethyst stone, but this is a chatelaine hook that would clip to a skirt, and it would carry these little holes here. It would carry little sewing implements, like little scissors and like a little thimble, and that's actually in the collection here at the library. This is not noted in any of the inventories. Again, this is one of those bric-a-brac items, which we're happy to have. As I talked about the Stillman clock, since we started our research, we are very excited to report that we have identified, above and beyond the clock here at the library, 3 other clocks in collections. This first clock right here, which appeared in a mid-1970s exhibition from the Lyman Allen Museum over at Connecticut College, is in a private collection here in Westerly. This second clock, and I took some pictures of the face because you could see here, this has that wonderful scallop shell on both the bottom and the top here. No window in the door. And all 3 of these clocks have what we call flame finials. These are wood finials in a flame shape, and the bonnets of each of these, as opposed to the clock that's at the library here, these have what we call whale tail cutouts. It looks like little whale's tails coming up out of the water. Very, very, very significant for this area. So you have the flame finials, the rounded bonnet top, and each door was different. This one right here is in a public collection. This is down at the Stanton Davis homestead. Look, and you could see the big scallop shell here. This one happens to have the OG window opening. You can see the pendulum. And this particular clock, which is in the exhibition at Yale, has come to us from a private collector in New York. Again, you see the scallop shells. You see the bonnet here. What's really exciting here, and we're actually in the process of making a little film that we're going to put on YouTube. This is an animated clock whereby there's like a little farmer, and he comes out with a little mallet and he taps the bull on the head as the hour strikes. So here you could see the wonderful work by the Stillman clockmakers in all these different clocks, the scallop shell, the bonnets, the flame finials, the brass orbs. Very, very exciting. So we've now identified 4 in collections when it was only thought that 1 existed. So that's been really exciting. And when we find the cabinet maker, that's going to be a phenomenal discovery. Still working at that one. I wanted to include in this that throughout Mary Noyes Rogers' life, she kept a lot of things, which is very exciting. In a private collection, I have a whole book of photographs. Her maternal side of the family, if you go to Weekapaug and you look at the street names, you have Noyes Neck Road. That was all farmland. That was owned on her maternal side. The Noyes family owned all of Weekapaug. And so there's pictures of the summer cottages at Weekapaug. There's some wonderful, these are pictures from the late 19th, early 20th century, pictures of the Weekapaug Beach area. There's an early picture of the end of Leicester Avenue when it was made up, looking downtown into Pawcatuck. And this right here, if you can imagine, this is where Evans Mobile is now. So it's looking into town. These right here, part of a private collection. These, in those days there was a lot of handiwork. Women got together to read. These are part of a private collection that are in a book that I kind of relate to maybe today's, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, but it was a book that seemed to have been passed around to different women, and they would write poetry or religious passages or Bible quotes, in this book, and they would sign and date it and where their residence was, and then it would get passed on. It's from all over the Wesley area, and I'm actually now putting together the genealogy of some of these people to try to figure out, where they were and, and who they were and what their relationship might have been with Mary Noyes Rogers, but it would have been her mother, Martha Babcock Noyes. And you see it's beautiful. This is a beaded a bookmark. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's still in pristine. It's silk, and it's in this book of poems and passages, and it's in absolutely pristine condition. All the beadwork is intact. So it's pretty impressive. So, here's a genealogy chart, which I don't expect anyone to, try to look at and figure out all the dates. But what came up, as I was doing, I had to do a full genealogy chart in order to figure out where these pieces were and who they were related to. But one of the most exciting things as these pieces were then identified to come to this exhibition at Yale on early Rhode Island furniture was that I found that Mary Noyes Rogers, on her Noyes family side, being that it goes back to pre-revolutionary time, that her descendant, James Noyes, was called to the Road Church in Stonington to preach. So he left England in the late 17th century, traveled to Newburyport, Massachusetts. From there, preached for quite a while, but then was called down to the Road Church when that was going to open in the late 17th century. And he was one of what they call the founders. He was one of the 8 clergymen that founded Yale University. So talk about a full circle, that all of these discoveries now are back at Yale, which was discovered by a descendant of Mary Noyes Rogers and founding of Yale. And so that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions about any portion of this, but I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation and tell folks about it, and we go from there. Thank you. Ellen.
Charlene, I have a surprise for you that I don't think you've seen. The library is celebrating its 125th birthday next year, and I've been researching some historic photographs in preparation for a tour of the library, and we found a photograph of this room with the 2 chairs right there on the side of the screen, and we will get you a copy.
That's phenomenal. And Ellen, on that, and I'll get to you in just a second, on that, are you at liberty to announce anything about next year and what we're going to do? Do you feel you're at liberty to talk about the Mary Noyes Rogers collection and what we're thinking of doing?
I certainly am.
Okay. So as anything like this, there's no sense in us keeping it under wraps, and we just want to keep growing and growing.
So as part of the 125th birthday celebration, the library is assembling its special collection, and we will be having from mid-August through mid-November a display in the gallery of paintings and sculpture and all kinds of things that the library owns. And the central feature will be the clock, the portraits, the pin, because they will come back to the library in January. So you have walked past that clock every single time you come into the library. It won't be so easy the next
Yeah.
day.
And we're hoping, if I'm correct in saying this, Ellen, that we're hoping that we can take the entire bequest of Mary Noyes Rogers and have it on display. It's something that I've been asked to curate, and I am thrilled to be able to do that and have that available. None of these pieces have ever been in public view, and to have those out will be wonderful, because I'll tell you, some of the discoveries we've made in the clock was mainly because of as we were doing our research, the wonderful folks here at the library, Nina and Brigitte, the director, just kept telling people about it. And as they saw people look at different things, they'd ask if they could offer any information, and they just started putting the word out. And a private collector is the one who said to Nina, I think I have a Stillman clock. And she goes, may I share your name with Charlene Senecal? And they opened their home to me and showed me the clock. And then I called my curators and said, you need to come down because I think we found another clock. So, you know, as I've said in some of my articles, is that one of I kind of rely on you know, the wonderful you know, support that the folks in this area do, and you know, by saying that I'm a Wesley Park Duck person, people go, oh, well, we want to help out, and then I kind of throw in the Yale thing because that opens doors too. So I work with both of those, so it helps. The woman in green, yes, thank you. Okay. Wow. They did because, right, because in fact in that photo book, the book of photographs from Weekapaug and the cottages, there are a couple photos that say, we did, in our research, we use digital cameras with an infrared attachment to them, and we can photograph items that with the naked eye you can't see graphite. So a lot of these things we've identified we can't see with the naked eye, and we photographed them with this infrared digital camera, and we're able to pull up clear as day graphite signatures. And one of the things, there's some graphite writings in the photo book, and we've done them with the infrared and been able to see things like noise rock and noise farm. So then we could kind of say, oh, that's what that says, and we hadn't been able to see that before. Yeah. Yes. Yep. The dates were mid 19th century. I have dates in that book from 1845 right up until just before the Civil War, about 1861-ish. And you know, I see Wesley, and then there's, you know, a lot of Wesley, a lot of Staunton. You know, it'll say, you know, Mary Smith, Staunton, Connecticut. It'll date it. And then there were a couple from West Bridgewater, Mass. So that's why I'm putting together the genealogy, because I don't know if maybe there were cousins, relatives, whomever, and you know, were they together and wrote these passages, or you know, how was this group? You know, was it a reading group, a literary group? Not really sure. You know, it's in a private collection. Yeah, maybe we'll be able to get it and have it next year. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yep.
I'd like to ask about the Stillman. It's such a common name around here, but it was very important back in
Yeah.
the day. Do you know anything about Paul Stillman? Where do you think
they had shop? Well, that's the great thing, is that I think that from what I can tell, and I'm still culling some maps and stuff like that, but I think approximately where Lito Macchetti's frame shop is, right here outside the Dog Classic Framers, we think that was Paul Stillman's shop.
I would be happy to help you look at
Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
it.
So we think that's where his shop was. And the thing is that while I was waiting to get access to collections here and there, I went as far as searching down because a great part of information can also be found on gravestones. So my uncle and I went tramping through the woods, and we found actually the Stillman cemetery, and all of the Stillman, Paul Stillman, Willard Stillman, are all buried out on Potter Hill Road in the cemetery. So it's great to have that information too. Any other questions?
You wrote a book about all of this?
No, I haven't. I know I haven't written a book. I have a lot of notes, but a lot of you'll see this beautiful book right up here that just came out. This is a book that's for the exhibition, and it has all of the pieces from the library here. And I'm not promoting anything, but if the book is expensive, it's $85, but it's an absolutely gorgeous book. But if 5 of you get together and want to order 5 or more books, it's 40% off. So that's a big chunk of money if anybody's interested in getting the book through the Yale, through the art gallery. But most all of, like a lot of the notes that I've done are in this book, as part of the research, and there've been articles. Ellen Madison from Babcock Smith House wrote a great article in Early American Life magazine about the clock and the history and stuff like that. So she did it from the perspective as the clock being a student coming to Yale and preparing to come to Yale. So it talks about what it takes to put together an exhibition. And one of the great things that I just recently reported to the library is that with the clock coming to the library, of course it was born in 1807, that when we brought the clock in, there were it needed a little bit of facelift on the casework, and we've done some beautiful, by a top restorer, we've done some nice little touch-ups for it. So it's coming back with a little facelift when it comes back to the library in January. So we're very excited. And I'm hoping the bill of sale, we did not remove that from the library here because any paper with ink of that period, anything on paper is very, very light sensitive. So it's best that it stays here. So we had it professionally photographed. And my graphics department at the art gallery did some blown up images for you folks to look at. But the bill of sale is there, and I'm hoping, and if anybody wants to put the word out, I'd love to see if we could get a nice foundation to help us stabilize the bill of sale and get the cellotape, the early 20th century cellotape off of it, and try to preserve it for maybe another couple hundred years, because that's a timeless treasure. That bill of sale is just amazing. So we're hoping. I've actually had my paper conservators at the university look at it and said it's in absolutely fantastic condition and could stay that way, just be archivally done in an acid-free environment. But we'd like to have someone take a look at it, see if the tape can be removed, the residue, and just have it stabilized for future generations. Any other questions?
I just want to comment. I identify with you. I came to be a history aficionado late in life, in my late 50s. I'm 62 now, and I write a newsletter for the rest of the Historical Society.
Oh, okay.
But nothing more thrilling than discovering something that you've always wondered about, or
Yep.
that no one else knows yet. And up until that first aha moment that I ever had, I just thought that we are no everything about everything. Right?
Yeah.
And come to find out that, got the time to research the topic, there's plenty of stuff that we don't
Oh,
know.
I have to share 2 quick little things. Last week we had we have this annual, what we call ROQUE, R-O-Q-U-E symposium. It's an endowed symposium we have at the university, at the art gallery for American arts. So one year it's usually Dec Arts, and the next year it's American painting and sculpture. So this year it was in conjunction with the exhibition, and Ellen was fortunate to come down to that with members of the library staff here. And on the second day when talks were given, our curator, Pat Kane, had talked about, for a couple years they had been beating the bushes because they found this piece, and they kept reading signatures and references to a maker named Allie Burton. And they're like, well, Allie is just such an odd name for a 18th, 19th century maker, Allie. We see Ezekiel, we see, biblical names, but Allie. And they couldn't find anything until they came across an advertisement for a maker selling in Providence, and it was Halliburton, Hallyburton. So where they were reading Allie Burton, it was really Halliburton. And then the pieces started coming together. So on the second day of our symposium, Gary Sullivan, who is a well-known clock historian, dealer, got up and presented some stuff, and our book had just come out, so everybody was, lugging around their 800-pound book, happy to have this new treasure. And Gary Sullivan gets up and starts talking about all of these wonderful clocks and the Stillmans and other, Rhode Island makers. And he said, I'm going to now surprise everyone here, including Pat Kane, that we just this week, as you're saying about coming across things, we're notified of a account book for a cabinet maker, and it's the Halliburton. And they hadn't even seen it yet, but were told about it. So he was going to be getting his hands on it in the next week or so. So in some ways, some pieces of our book have already been outdated. But I have to tell you that the pictures in the private collection that I showed, that then, before I discovered them in the DAR book, I happened to have the person who owns the pictures let me use them for research. And I had them all lined up at my parents' house as I was visiting on Leicester Avenue. And my nephew came in one day, and he's looking at him. He's like 6 years old. And he's looking at him. He's like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm doing research. And I explained to him a little bit. And he goes, but Cheryl, those are pictures of the inside of my friend's house. Why do you have pictures of my friend's house? And that's when I connected it to Mary Noyes Rogers Homestead, which now was a residence that his friend's parents owned. So it was just like, I had never been in the house, and I said, well, now I know that the house has stayed intact with the paneling, with the wood paneling. So, and I have to say too that I'm working with the library. We're in the very, very early stages. Is that through this research, we're hoping, I don't know when we're going to be able to do it, but we're hoping to create a program for local high school students called, right now tentatively calling it History Mystery, where we talk about how to research, and we're hoping to have people from probate, like town hall, like land records, tax people, lawyers, come in and meet with the students and talk about, probate records, and, and what they were all about, how they've changed, hoping to get maybe some bankers involved to talk about the monetary, system, after the Revolutionary War, and how, the English money wasn't worth anything, and we started printing our own money. And I just learned the other day that when the Washington Trust Bank became incorporated in 1800, they were the first bank to print paper money with George Washington's image. And I thought that was amazing. So when I look at the transaction of the clock, I'm thinking, I would love to know what the money looked like. That would have been interesting. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I work at Washington.
You do?
Yes, and
Oh.
we have quite a few historical artifacts in our home, which would be available to you, the marketing department, if you should so request.
Okay. So before any of you folks, before you leave, if you would please leave me contact information, take my business card, because I will love to follow up with you folks and, tap these resources, because I think it's really important. We need to get, as I see too, I've often said as I visit different places and have meetings, we need to get some of the younger folks involved in this and have them start taking over the reins. And I mean, I don't want to sound silly, but we've all seen, we all read the news, we've seen what the play Hamilton in New York City has done for history classes. I mean, this quiet old historical information that kids are like, oh, now all of a sudden it's kind of come to light. So however we can get them involved. So like I said, if we put together this program, History Mystery, that's the way to get them involved, and it involved with local history, all the better for it. So if that's everything, I thank you all again.